Welcome back to another episode of Titan Tidbits on the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you're just tuning in to your first episode here of Titan Tidbits, these are short, approximately 10-minute episodes where Chad and I discuss the questions and give answers to topics that are fresh on everybody's mind, including our Tighten Up training clients, as well as ourselves, things that we're working on in our businesses, and anybody else that is trying to get answers to solve the problems that they have in running a moving company. So I've got with me my co-host of Titan Tidbits and co-founder of Tighten Up Training and Moving Titan Retreats, Chad Coatney. What's up today, Chad? How are you?
Everything's great, man. Just another day, another dollar, and another question for Titan Tidbits. Are you ready?
Yeah, what do we got?
All right, this one's from Levi Siegelman with Levi's Neighborhood Moves. Shout out to Levi.
What's up, Levi?
He wants to know, what are the first SOPs to create when you don't know where to start?
I love this question. Yeah, I feel like we get asked this a lot at our retreats and just, when we're having conversations with smaller companies or companies who maybe aren't even small. They just, don't have documented SOPs and they're relying too heavily on their people rather than on their processes. And the goal with an SOP, building them out for your company, is so that you can manage your processes and not have to manage your people. You let people manage the processes. And ultimately, every single role in the company, every single task in the company should have documented SOPs. But if you're just starting out, you and I, Chad, both did not have SOPs when we first started. We probably didn't even know what they were or why we should have them. We just kind of went out there and winged it and hoped for the best. And we were very hands-on, obviously, and sometimes still are in certain parts of the company. But we were on the trucks when we started off and answering the phone while we were driving down the street and doing things that were very difficult to scale with. But if I had to do it over again, and I know what I knew then, what I know now, I would say starting off with your movers, because these are your customer facing people. It's the core of what your business does as a moving company. It is what the customer is going to interact with and see and remember after moving day. And it's also a very high turnover position. In order to grow, and even if you don't grow, you're going to have a lot of movers coming through the door, and you're going to need to hire more rapidly and put them to work. And the last thing you want is an inconsistent experience. Sure, you might go find a couple van line guys or a couple dogs that have been in the business for a long time that know what they're doing, but there's different ways to skin a cat. There's the van line way, there's bands, there's stretch wrap, there's tape, there's different ways to load different types of trucks. There's all kinds of different pieces of furniture that you're going to come across with on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, ideally, what I always say is that getting people in the door that don't have 30 years of moving experience tend to be the best movers that we end up hiring. They may not know anything about moving. They may have never picked up a piece of furniture in their life, but we hire for attitude and we train for aptitude. And the only way to do that is to have a documented, well thought out system and process so that you can provide that training, that onboarding, and that consistent experience for your client, and not rely on a bunch of old dogs that have bad habits coming in that may not have good attitudes. I think that's where a lot of moving companies get it wrong, is that they try to hire for experience, but that usually comes with a lot of problems, because most of the time people get into moving not because it was their dream job as a child. It's usually because of life's circumstances that put them into a position where they have to do manual labor. And that's not to say there aren't great people that choose that or that like doing that. But what I've found is a lot of times it makes the most sense to hire experienced service industry providers from other industries that have that great attitude, because if they have the great attitude, they're going to be willing to learn and follow the processes that you lay out. And so I would start by basically coming up with a summary of moving day. What happens from point A to point B, from the time that they get into work to the time that they leave to go home, and then what happens the next day with scheduling and how that all works. Figuring out what the SOP is, or the checklist for their uniforms, is a pretty fundamental one. What the dispatch process looks. Do they need to get an inventory of the truck? Do they need to do a pre-trip inspection? Do they have to call the customer on their way out to the job site? When they get to the job site, what do? How do they greet their customer? What do they first start setting up? What is the first things that they load onto the truck? What happens once they're finished loading? when they do a walkthrough before heading to the next location? What do they do when they get to the next location? How do they close out the job at the end of the day? How do they ask for a review? All of those things are extremely important. It's the fundamental core of everything we do. And I think that's the first thing you got to figure out the best way of doing it before you start branching off into other departments.
Yeah, I think that's some really good input there, Wade, and I would agree with you. I mean, you gotta everyone needs to be on the same page, right? You can't have one guy doing it this guy, one guy doing it this way, and then it's just going to cause confusion, it's going to cause turmoil, and it's just you're not going to deliver a consistent product or service. So I think that's a great place to start. And Levi's saying, when you don't know where to start, just start. Start anywhere is going to be better than not starting. But yeah, I would probably start with the movers, and then I would probably go into sales and I would dial that in. What do we say when we answer the phone? How soon do we need to get back to the leads? How do you enter it all in the smart moving? What kind of notes are we taking from the customers? How are we estimating the job? What is your sales script? Build those out. So, that's all tightened up. How do you take the deposit? How do you take the inventory? Dial that in, because sales is important. You're not going to have a job to do if you're not booking jobs. So I would kind of start in those two areas. I think that's a great place to start. And then the cool thing is, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but you can put all your SOPs on Tighten Up training. So you could build out the mover portion customized to your company, and you could have your SOPs with quizzes. That should be part of your onboarding and training process. And then you can, have the same thing for the inside sales. And it's just, you should have it for every part of your company. Just start building those out, and you're going to keep adding to them. You're going to, processes are going to change over time. Processes are going to break, and you're going to need to fix them. But it's a great place to have them. It's going to make you look super organized. It's going to get people up to speed as quick as possible. It's going to save you from wasting time having to manually teach them all this stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I would start. I would start with the mover processes and then roll into sales.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said just start doing something. That's when I wrote my book, that was the mentality that I had. I had no idea where to start with that. I would just dedicate 15 minutes when I was getting a nice coffee buzz in the morning to sit down and just start typing, just start trying to lay out a framework. I think having a framework is another good place to start, where you make bullets of every role in the company, every department that you would like to ultimately fill in the blanks on. I did that with the chapters and the subjects of my book. And then you just vomit out onto the page or onto the screen, keyboard, everything that you can think of. And then you can always refine it later. It does not have to be a perfect process in the beginning. You could start with just some bullet points. Dispatch is at 7:15. First thing you do is pre-trip inspection. Then you get an inventory. Then you call the customer, and you just basically lay out bullets. It doesn't have to be, an essay or an entire novel. You can always go back and add to it. But I think just getting some checklists down is a huge first step. Getting a layout of what you ultimately will need to write those processes for. And then, you said sales. I think identifying what your biggest weakness is as an owner, or if you have a couple team members already, or if you have a full team already, where is your biggest weak spots, your biggest weak links, where there's not the consistency and there's not, you might have to train from the ground up somebody to do, figure out what those things that you don't want to be doing as the owner that are the most difficult for you, and then figure out how to do it. Seek some mentorship, talk to the people in Moving Company Owners Unite, or come to a Titan retreat and find out the best recipe for that specific role from somebody who's done it in a different market, or sometimes even your own market. For me, it's operations. I like doing the sales. Some people are naturally, they got the gift of gab. They're good at sales. Maybe they had some sales experience. So the first thing I wanted to do was hire somebody to do dispatch and operations and scheduling, because that part is the least fun part in the business for me. And it was the first thing I wanted to hire out for. But I also, just because I didn't like it, didn't mean that I didn't go and find out how it needed to be done. So I found those answers and I wrote it out so that it could be copied and pasted for the next person to be able to do how I wanted it done, with somebody who enjoys following those types of processes and doing those types of tasks. So, I think you could do sales, you could do ops, you could do another area of the business where you don't love doing, but I think it's where you're going to have a lot of turnover and have to replicate that a lot more frequently. and basically write to your weakest spot first. So you can delegate and hire out for that weakest spot and provide that consistent training.
Figure out the bullet points, the main points of the process, of the move day process. Write those down and then just one by one, just kind of knock them out. And you know what? Like, it's never been easier to build your processes and procedures now that we have AI to help us with it. So just get on either ChatGPT, Claude, and have some conversations on how exactly it's done. And it can pop it out to you in no time with the quizzes afterwards too. So
that's
yeah.
a great point. I think if you give it the rubric and prompt it correctly with exactly where you want to write an SOP for, it will give you a world-class SOP essentially for free.
Yeah. So
love it.
I think that's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this 10-minute Titan Tidbit with Chad Coatney of Titan Up Training and Moving Titan Retreats. We hope to see you all out at the June Scottsdale Moving Titan Retreat. If you don't know about that, reach out to us and we'll get you set up. Otherwise, we will be doing our big event in September. So just a couple teasers there. And as always, Titan Up Training is a great platform to host all of these processes on. So we hope to see you on those. Have a great day, everybody. Tighten up.
Tighten up.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you would like to learn more about any of the sponsors listed on this show, want to apply for the next Moving Titan retreat, or interested in owning or working for Two College Brothers franchise, drop me a line at wade@twocollegebrothers.com. Moving out. Have a great day.